As you guys know, every single Thursday, I do a roundtable with some of the greatest minds and thinkers in the crypto space and beyond. And today I've got some amazing guests. I've got Bruce Fenton, running for Senate, New Hampshire, vote. I got Drew, my friend from RoundlyX, Dave Weisberger, and of course, SBF. We're going to talk about, listen, I was planning to talk a lot about Bitcoin, but I have a feeling we're going to talk about Elon Musk's potential buyout of Twitter and what that means. And of course, Justin Sun saying he'll do $60 because why not just raise it to 55 if, Elon Musk is saying 54. And we're going to talk all things Bitcoin, of course. You guys don't want to miss it. Stick around.
Let's go.
What's up, everybody? I'm Scott Melker, also known as the Wolf of Wall Street. Before we get started, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Yeah, actually, of all the guests today, I put three faces to names in Miami last week. Bruce, Drew, Dave, we all actually met in person. Sam, we still have not met in person. That's the only one here who I was not able to. But I'm just going to go ahead and bring everyone on, and we're gonna go for it. I think this is the first time we might have had 5 people on the screen. Well, I don't see Dave, so I'm gonna remove him until he appears. But guys, welcome. How y'all doing? Everyone recovering better than me from Miami, I hope.
Doing well.
Good to see you guys.
Sam, Sam, I saw your negative COVID test on Twitter, so I guess you just got over it.
I did. I was recovering during Miami instead of after it, so I'm now fully recovered.
Well, this was that awkward moment where Bruce and Drew came on. I was like, oh, we had a face-to-face conversation on Thursday, by the way. But I think they're well in the clear since it took me a few days. So, guys, listen, I'm going to bring on Dave, too. He's here. What's up, Dave?
Hey.
So, yeah, I think the big news story of the day, obviously, is this move by Elon Musk to potentially buy Twitter. And, Bruce, you had an amazing tweet in response to someone where you called it shareholder activism, which is a term that I had never heard before. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I'm excited. I mean, I'm kind of a stock market geek. You know, my mom was a broker, so I was sort of raised on brokerage firms' floors from a very young age. So this is right up my alley. I'm super interested in this stuff, and I've been saying for a while that, stronger shareholder rights, solve a lot of problems, and I can't wait to see more of this.
Do you think that Justin Sun's offer is serious? I mean, doesn't Twitter kind of have to entertain these? Anyone? I mean, Sam, do you think Twitter has to entertain these offers?
I don't think that Twitter is going to treat it as serious just because it was tweeted. I suspect they're going to wait for it. Something
I meant Elon's. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I do think they're going to take it as serious. I don't know what's going to happen. Obviously, I wouldn't be shocked if it went through. I think. Right, like Twitter and its board of directors and its management have a duty to their shareholders to maximize value to them, right? And they don't have to accept this offer, but the offer is above the current market price. And anytime you see that, I would guess at the very least, if they don't accept it, you'd probably have to see justification from them about why they think that the future of Twitter is rosier than what that offer would represent. And they have to at least a little bit disagree with the market in doing so. So I would be surprised if they roundly dismissed it without serious consideration.
Dave?
I mean, Sam's right. I mean, the fact is we all know that the largest shareholders of Twitter and basically all tech companies are the index funds and the large money managers. And at the end of the day, if you think that, and obviously I've not been privy to these conversations, but having run a program trading desk and knowing those asset managers as well as they do, every one of them is in conversations with Twitter management now to say what they think about this. And if they think that Twitter is more valuable than Musk's offer, then they'll push back. But if they don't, then of course there's always the possibility of a hostile offer, which is exactly what they don't want. But the important point that Sam mentioned, which is critical, is they have the duty to the shareholders, not to the employees. And we know that, we've seen a lot of issues that have come up because employees are saying, oh, no, they're going to change management direction. And frankly, that unless they thought that critical employees, like critical developers and things that actually make the company matter, are going to leave, that's when they have to care about the employees. But, the base, caterwauling doesn't really matter a whole heap.
Yeah, and I mean, frankly, if they think this is going to signal a change in management, I mean, I think you could take the position pretty reasonably that that's, if anything, a reason that they have to take this even more seriously. If a bit higher than the share price is coming along with the change in management, right? Like, that's not, you can't dismiss that on the grounds of like, that's bad. Like, that's often what people might think would be in the interest of shareholders.
I mean, they just switched effectively. I mean, Jack just exited anyways. This is sort of a nice time to bridge if they were going to do it in the first place. I mean, the 19 to 20 spam bots that I get the minute I tweet say that it's time for a change at Twitter already, right? It seems like they're not controlling some of the largest problems that the platform has.
Yeah, and I mean, I think another thing that you could ask is like, I don't know, someone want to name, just tell me what's the latest feature that Twitter rolled out?
Yeah. It was like fleets and they didn't last very long, right?
Right. When was their last successful product rollout? So like 2015 or so? I mean, I can't be, it must be more recent than that, but I actually can't name a recent one.
It would be Spaces, but that was just as a response to Clubhouse. There's nothing novel.
Yeah.
I mean, that's literally, the only things they've rolled out are Instagram stories and Clubhouse, right? But native to Twitter. It's true. Yeah. Drew, what do you think?
So, I think they have to take it seriously, if only for the fact that he's such a huge presence on the platform. And, honestly, some of the most exciting ideas coming out of Twitter were recent Musk tweets about what he may or might push if, the board, then he, hopped off. So.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with that, but it's going to be interesting, I think, to see how it plays out. Bruce, I mean, to your point, if it's about freedom and of expression, I mean, are we confident that if Elon Musk buys it, that actually improves? He's one guy.
I think it would improve. It's pretty bad right now. Twitter made its name during the Arab Spring. Was one of the greatest points for Twitter, and it was a platform where people could speak without censorship, and you could criticize your leader, or you could support the other party, and that was a great strength, and it helped change the world. It was one of its golden moments, but that's changed so much now, and hopefully Elon could bring it back to that.
Seems like it's changed across all social media platforms, though, right? I mean, it's not unique to Twitter. And anything that anyone tries to launch that's competitive is just a utter failure, right?
Yeah,
we've seen.
I mean, Twitter basically coincided with the inexorable social trend towards sound bites. And so, people want to see things quickly. I mean, Sam is awesome at putting together long tweet storms, and some of us will actually read all of them, and others just jump to the conclusion. But the reality of the situation is you literally have to read through, because obviously your thoughts are complicated. Hell, mine, I try to keep to 3 or 4, but it's hard, right? But at the end of the day, it's the way people are getting information, and all the bots, the nutty way they do verification. I mean, not for nothing. I mean, forget me. There are people with significant followings that aren't verified who get spammed all the time. And then others who say things that the employees like, who get verified very early. It just doesn't make a whole heap of sense right now.
Yeah, I agree. I want to move on beyond Elon Musk, because we could probably talk this to death and talk about the actual market. Lot of fear, I think, still moving forward of the Fed, but Bitcoin seems to just be treading water. I mean, anybody have any thoughts of where we stand right now? I mean, right now it's 40,800, but it feels like we've been at 42,000 for a year and a half, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing to remember here is that, like, markets, in theory, okay, obviously in practice not everything is efficient, but in theory they respond to new information, not realization of information. And so in theory, right, like when Fed rate hikes come out, or when CPI is published, or things like that, it's not clear whether markets, quote unquote, should be moving up or down. In theory, they could go either direction, and really it's just a question of like whether the news was more or less good, good or bad than what people had anticipated it would be. And so to the extent that maybe we've reached a bit of an equilibrium where the market has rough expectations for how much inflation to be expecting, over the next, few years, for what monetary policy might look like, and that at some point, new sort of like developments are just coming out in line with expectations, right? You might see consolidation of price. You might see a decrease in the monetary policy driven volatility if all the new monetary policies are just like, I don't know, about what people would have guessed they'd be.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It was interesting. I mean, if we believe that 8.5 is the number, I think nobody does, right? But looking back at how they calculated, obviously, CPI throughout the years, we would be at about 16, 17, 18% based on the way it was calculated in the 80s, right? Maybe 12 to 13% apparently on how it was calculated in the 90s. And some models, when you don't put it at a 12-month peg, have it as high as 25%. I mean, it's brutal.
Pretty amazing. You wonder how many more times the Fed can be this far behind the ball, right? So they're far behind the inflation curve, so they've got to adjust really, really quickly, pull a lot of liquidity out, raise rates faster. Does that put us, into a downtrend, which then they need to go straight back into QE again? How many more times does this happen with Bitcoin only at 40K, right? So I've never been more long-term bullish, just watching the Fed try to work its way through always being behind. We haven't even hit, food inflation from the geopolitical unrest, just coupled with, dumping a couple $1 trillion of printed money on. What's Twitter going to say about, Arab Spring #2, right? When, you can correlate global commodity prices to the last Arab Spring anyway. So I think
I'm having deja vu, Scott. I mean, I'm the old man on this panel. I was an economics major at Northwestern in 1980s, the early 80s. And, when Volcker did what he did, and I can remember it was amusing because I was at Northwestern, but I was more of a Chicago style student. And I was arguing with my professor that real interest rates at a high enough level will break inflationary expectations. And he, of course, didn't agree with me. It was Robert Gordon, who was a fairly famous Keynesian. And the reality is we saw what happened. But people need to keep in mind the Fed can't do that now. Not without bankrupting the U.S. government. They literally
debt to GDP was like 30% or something, right? I mean, it's
34%. And even if you don't count unfunded liabilities of Social Security and Medicare, the debt to GDP is 134% now.
Yeah. Sam, I know you got to go. I know you had 15 minutes, so I'm going to give you a soft landing as opposed to you having to. Thank you so much for joining always, man. I'm glad you're feeling better.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Have a good one, man.
Sam. 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I think getting 15 minutes of Sam's time is worth like $10 billion actually in interest. So I think we, I can't afford him for an hour. No way.
Real interest rates, and you got to do time value of money. You're probably not far off.
Yeah, maybe I can beat inflation with Sam's time on here. But yeah, so I mean, I obviously agree. I mean, Bruce, we didn't get your thoughts there, but listen, you're running for Senate, right? This has to be a huge issue in your mind.
Yeah, I mean, we have broken economic policies. We've printed trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars from thin air, and that's just not sustainable. It doesn't work. I think you should be able to explain that to a grade school child. I use the example of taking a Monopoly game and just drawing zeros on it. It's just and that's really kind of, for all their fanciness and their big offices and their big titles, that's really what the Fed is doing. That's what the government is doing. It's just printing money from thin air, and a lot of it goes to their cronies. So that's just bad policy. And you have kind of unlimited money being printed, and you have this scarce asset of Bitcoin where there's only 21 million of them. And so that's an interesting formula that we haven't seen in the world before.
Hey,
we have someone here with the last name Fenton who says they might be your distant relative, Bruce. I don't know if you saw the comment.
Bruce, I have a question for you. In political circles, how is Stephanie Kelton doing these days? People taking her seriously anymore?
Not in my circles. I mean, I've never been a fan of MMT. It's sort of one of these things where you add lots and lots of complexity on something to make a really bad idea sound smart. Like, oh, let's print money from thin air and give it away. And then you just write a whole book about it and make a big philosophy to make it sound like it's really complex and intelligent. But at the end of the day, that's all it is. And that's not really money. That's just a thing that, pieces of paper with dead politicians on it that somebody says is money. And if you keep doing that, eventually less and less people will believe it's money, and they'll move to something more sound, like Bitcoin or gold or something else.
I feel
Is
like
gold more sound now? I mean, is that? Go ahead, Drew.
Gold is tough. I mean, I'm Bitcoiner, so I think
Yeah.
Bitcoin's the new thing.
Yeah, of course. Drew, sorry.
I feel like it's just history repeating. So right before the 2018 bear market, I went to Belize and went out to one of the Mayan ruins, and it was one of these places where they would do something fancy with coconut shells, and that was like the currency, right? So it's like now we just have a giant Fed building in downtown Richmond. It seems fancy, but it's the same deal. We're just doing the same shit again.
What's funny, Scott, is I saw it. I can't remember who tweeted about it, but somebody went through the statistics of all the Fed governors, and pretty much all of them have spent their entire career as an economist at the Federal Reserve. Which I at some point in the future, say 50 years or whatever in the future, you're going to see a class that I took a class in cognitive dissonance and communication theory when I was at school. And, they always talk about the most famous example was the Chevy Nova before this. But I think that the groupthink that's going on in the Federal Reserve through complete insulation and lack of challenging of dogma is going to be maybe the best class. And since I introduced it, the story is simple. There was a Spanish-speaking group of people that worked for the head of marketing, and Chevy had this car in the 70s called the Nova, which was incredibly popular, and they wanted to release it in Latin America and Mexico. And none of the Spanish speakers corrected the boss to tell him that in Spanish, no va means no go. Because he was a charismatic leader and it was groupthink, and they just didn't.
Good name for a car.
Let's know what they're talking about, and of course, it didn't do too well. So it was a very famous example. But groupthink is a real problem, and when you have hundreds of policymakers all insulated, they're not looking for challenges. They're not looking to see what's going on, and I think that's what history will show. But it'll be far in the future because we're still living it now, and these things take a lot longer than traders want them. Traders, we all have memories like we want things to happen now. And I agree in terms of being long-term bullish. I mean, between what's going on and between the censorship resistance that we talked about in previous weeks, Mr. Trudeau, and what's going on, I think that I've never been more long-term bullish on Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think we could all agree. You said you took a class in cognitive dissonance. That's hilarious because I just call that Facebook. I just read my Facebook. It's a class in cognitive dissonance every single day. But I think that you're right. I had a guest yesterday, the senior head of senior research at Masari, and he actually made the argument, and he had some pretty good data, that he believes inflation is actually still transitory at the moment, basically based on the price. He thinks that the idea that the price of houses will come down, and that will effectively control inflation because it's such a massive part of the CPI. But he believed that it's going to naturally take care of itself, and by the end of the year, fine. I don't know.
But honestly, one way or another, that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world for people. The fact is the Fed cannot make real interest rates positive. They simply can't. So they're trying to yell, scream, and get rid of speculation with negative real interest rates by raising them to being higher than they are now, and hoping that they can cool speculative excesses, and those excesses will cool inflation. The bigger problem is if one, I believe you could trace a straight line from consumer inflation as opposed to asset inflation coming from all the stimulus that was pumped into individuals, as opposed to 20 years of stimulus going to the banks and the cronies that Bruce mentioned. Which is why asset inflation, we had very high inflation before, when the CPI was at 2% or 2.5%. It just, the inflation was in the stock market, in real estate, in art, in whatever. I mean, crypto for lack of a better word. But yeah, assets. And people always say, oh, inflation. Yeah, they always look at the CPI, but the truth of the matter is inflation is the totality of the economy, what the value of it is expressed in dollars. And we had this dichotomy where it was going into assets because there were all sorts of things like globalization, being able to outsource technology. More investment meant technology would provide competition against labor. When capital is cheaper than labor, people substitute capital for labor. And so consumer inflation was kept down. And then the pandemic happened and we started throwing boatloads of money at individuals. What a surprise. Demand went up and you couldn't buy furniture anymore. And at the same time, the supply chain was crimped because people weren't going back to work. anyone on this panel go to a restaurant and not see a sign that says, please apologize for our slowness, we're having staffing problems?
Nobody has a job. Nobody wants to work.
Yeah.
Right. But that's so strange because it seems like that little stimulus which at the time was a lot, but how that has sustained to the point where I can't really get there mentally to how people still don't want to work. Things are more expensive. Shouldn't people want to get a job? Where are all these people living? How are they sustaining themselves?
This is the problem when you break things. The world is a very, very, very complex thing, and economics and jobs and the way that everything works, the way that supply chains work. Hopefully everybody's seen the Milton Friedman iPencil. I think it was somebody else who wrote it, but he popularized this iPencil. What it takes just to make a pencil. I mean, forget about an iPhone or something like that. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of parties. So when you go have these ham-handed tyrants come in and decide, well, I'm a scientist, so I think you can work and you can't, and you need a pass, and this closes, and this gym shuts down, and this restaurant, and you got to wear a mask over here. It breaks everything, and you break it. It's like going into it's like opening up your iPhone with a screwdriver and messing around with the circuits and thinking like, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing. No, you don't. They don't know what they're doing. They're bureaucrats, centralized authorities who think they know, and nobody's that smart. Nobody's smart enough to make decisions from some fancy marble office that they paid for with the money they stole from us in Washington, D.C., who can sit there and dictate and say, I think I know who should be working and who should be doing what. And once you start tinkering with that, everything starts breaking. A supply chain breaks, and you have second order and nth order effects that just keep ballooning outwards, and you have things that you just didn't anticipate. It's like, oh, now there's no more dog leashes. And I mean, I went in a restaurant the other day, they had the help wanted sign. I ordered a burger. They said, we don't have any beef. This is a regular mainstream chain, like a Chili's type of chain. They said, we don't have any beef. This is second world kind of screwball stuff that we're seeing in the first world now, and it's because of people meddling. You mess with this very delicate systems and things break. People give up, businesses close, you lose a lot of value. You can create value from nothing. When you have an empty building and some smart people and a couple computers, you can create $1 billion company, but you can also erase value. You can have a business, a restaurant that's been around for 30 years, and you've got Alice, who is the great cook, and so-and-so who's a great manager or something, and it's all gone. And that value's gone. That business might've been worth millions, and now it's worth zero. And so when you tinker, you end up with negative effects. And we're seeing that right now. There is consequences for these actions.
I wonder how, 3 to 5 years out, this current labor shortage affects the rate of automation, right? So like, do we have an employment crisis in a few years, right? Because now we've automated so much that you can't get jobs in 3 to 5 years that you would have gotten now if we hadn't had this distortion. And how does that
so like
play
a necessity is the mother of invention type of thing? We actually push forward the automation because nobody's working, and so companies have to do it.
Right. And does that play into UBI? And does that drive the price of the Bitcoin market?
I mean, bringing it back to Bitcoin and people, most Bitcoiners kind of intuitively get the notion why sound money is important. Not smart money, that's Ethereum, that's a totally different conversation, but why sound money is important. One of the great things about Bitcoin 2022 is the number of conversations I got to have with people who, with Bitcoiners of all ages, all types, and it is amazing how many people in our community actually understand money and what money means. The last time in American politics money mattered in terms of definite was when William Jennings Bryan in the 1800s delivered the Cross of Gold speech, and the population actually cared about whether gold or silver or bimetallism mattered, and what they were really fighting over was sound money versus controlled inflation. Today, we are seeing that kind of moment. Now, I'm not a Pollyanna. I'm not basically saying that, oh yeah, the election in November will be swung by sound money and Bitcoin and economic freedom. Although I'll tell you, I sure as hell hope it is. I'm sure you would agree with me, Bruce. But yes, the fact is it's really fascinating how many people I've had. I mean, we moved into an office in Miami, and yesterday was like I think the final people we had coming in, delivering something and installing crap for our offices, phone booths and stuff. And every single contractor that's come into our office has seen the CoinRoutes logo and wants to talk about Bitcoin. Pretty much every one of them don't look like stock market investors, I will tell you, but every one of them owned crypto or were looking at crypto and had questions about crypto. And frankly, their reason for doing so was, well, they just don't believe that the government can print money infinitely in this, and scarcity matters. And when I'm hearing that from electricians, plumbers, installers, painters, etc., something's happening here, and people don't really understand what this means. So when you talk about long-term bullish, it matters. And I think that Drew's point is very important.
Yeah, I think to Bruce's point as well, and to yours, maybe sound money isn't the hot button issue that swings the election, but the second level effects of that are the issues that are driving this, right? I mean, all these things we're seeing, all the things he's talking about that are broken, that's largely because the money is broken, right? Fix the money, fix the world, whatever meme you want to use. But even if someone isn't sitting down and doing the math on CPI and trying to figure out exactly why this is happening, they're seeing the effects, whether they like it or not, right?
Yeah, for sure. And and the flip side to this is something that Bruce talked about. Bruce gave I'm going to have to go to the tape and excerpt your tape about why central planning doesn't work, because it was exceptionally well delivered. So thank you for that. We have people like Elizabeth Warren, who are effectively the most important person in monetary and regulatory policy driving the agenda right now, who actually believes in central planning and actually believes that everything. The reason she hates Bitcoin, we understand, is because it threatens her ability to do central planning. And it's fascinating that belief actually has traction. I mean, I know some people who I thought were intelligent who actually thought that, oh yeah, you could do that. And as far as I can tell, in human history, literally in thousands upon thousands of years, no centrally planned economy has ever worked, except insofar as a direct war effort.
Oh, that's true. You speak of Elizabeth Warren. It's so funny. So one of the conversations I had in Miami, which actually came out today, is with Max Kaiser. And listen, I've had my share of expletives and funny moments, but he went on, it's in the conversation, he went on a rant. I think it was like if you played it as a highlight reel, it'd be like one of those beep, 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 beep. Literally a 2-minute rant where he called her things I've never even heard of. Very creative mind, Max Kaiser, when it comes to that. Wow.
Yeah, Scott, I was in a conference last week in Monday at the New York Stock Exchange, and I didn't use my favorite expression. I said she has her head up her nether regions. What I usually would say is she's suffering from RCI, which is a polite way of saying rectal cranial inversion. And the fact is, she's literally every single piece of FUD. I'm amazed that she hasn't retweeted the psychopath Bitcoin story. But I think even she probably realizes how insane that is. But
oh my God, let's talk about that. Are we all psychopaths?
Maybe.
Sign me up, I guess. It's like it's like a Twilight Zone episode. It's like what was the one where the one really beautiful person was considered ugly?
Oh yeah.
It's sort of like, so all of us who understand what's going on and have been so-called orange pilled, we're all the psychopaths, and everybody else who thinks you can print money infinitely and rely on the federal government, largesse, and all of that stuff, they're the normal people. I think it's just like a Twilight Zone episode in reverse.
It is, and the people are waking up exactly like you said. The regular Americans are waking up to it. When I'm on the campaign trail talking to just the backbone of America, regular people doing regular blue-collar, hardworking jobs, pretty much 100% of them ask me about Bitcoin. That's the first thing they care about. They say, hey, what's up with Bitcoin? Should I buy some? What's going on? And they ask about inflation, and they talk about inflation. And we've seen this, some of the greatest people in our space, especially in the early days, people like Andreas and Wences and Juan Lanos, they came from countries where they saw this happen. So you don't care about money and you don't understand money until you do. And the people that don't, they're just wrong. Elizabeth Warren either just purely doesn't understand it, or she's a bad actor, or both. I think it's a little bit of both. Don't forget that she was responsible. She was a TARP administrator, and they gave $800 billion of our money to bankers. And a lot of that went to bonuses. Some of them bought huge houses with this money that came from us.
Group at the time, Bruce. Trust me, I know. And the hypocrisy. It's funny. I've used this analogy before, but when you do magic tricks, the goal is you focus attention here and you're doing stuff all the way back here. So she yells at the bankers all the time, but really she wants the banking system to stay entrenched because that's where the political donations are. That's where the system is. That's what keeps her in power.
Yeah.
And the reality is it's a serious, that is a serious hypocritical problem that we have throughout politics. And I think that people need to understand what it really means. I mean, TARP was a great example. Everyone looked at the headline number in TARP, and it was big, but it wasn't that big. At the same time that TARP was going on, the Federal Reserve was loaning at a rate that banks could loan out at a much higher rate, and effectively giving them free access to that. People don't remember, Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs never wanted to be banks. They became banks because they gave them free access to be able to borrow at the Fed window at whatever the rate was at the time, I don't remember, and loan it out at 0.5% or 1% higher, effectively manufacturing free money. And that's a big deal. So people don't really understand all the plumbing that's going on, but the reality is access to free money from the banks is a very big part of their, quote, value proposition.
Do you remember when 800 billion was a lot of money, though?
Yeah. That was a big deal back then.
Huge deal. Now we throw around trillions like it's nothing. And that's only 14 years ago ish, 13. When they actually did it. 800 billion. Nobody even would cough at the thought of 800 billion now.
Yeah, they wouldn't even bother.
Or they would call it a compromise.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ask why we were so cheap. But doesn't that say so much, though, that only, less than a decade and a half later, we've now moved into multiple trillions as the measure of account for what's considered a lot of stimulus or help?
And that's real inflation. That's monetary inflation. That's Milton Friedman, all inflation is a monetary phenomenon. That's what he's talking about when he says that, or said that. Obviously, he's not with us anymore.
I think it's interesting, this conversation is kind of really gaining steam as we head into one of my favorite books, The Fourth Turning, right? This idea that generational cycles affect how we govern ourselves and how we look at the world and the mistakes we made that set up the next cycle. I think the book mentioned 2024, so maybe this is our moment, right? Where we got lucky with a little bit of, a good chunk of inflation to drive the conversation to enact real change at the next turning. Maybe.
Did someone remind me what's supposed to happen after 2024?
Yeah, that's. I'm glad you mentioned that book. I've mentioned that a lot, and it's really shaped my view, especially over the last couple of years. I read it many years ago. I think it was published in the late 90s, but I followed that kind of demographic trends. For people who don't know, basically it's the idea that every century or so you have, because of demographics as one major factor, but a lot of other factors, you have this shakeup where everything kind of changes. Borders change, money changes, economic system change, old power structures change. And that's what we're seeing right now. There's no question about it. We're in at least a fourth turning. I've used the term epoch shift, which is kind of even, bigger than a fourth turning, something more like the French and American revolutions where everything sort of changes. And we're definitely in that right now. We are in really unprecedented territory with the way that the world is shaking up and changing, and old power structures and systems are gone. We're seeing it right before our eyes. This is not, the next century is not going to be the century of the World Economic Forum, the Clinton Foundation, and CNN. Those power structures are gone. And, Joe Rogan has more viewers than CNN now. And so politics are going to change. Money is changing. System is changing, and this shareholder activism thing with Elon, that's another part of it. The world has a way, when you pile a bunch of junk on it, it kind of flexes like Atlas shrugging the earth off and off his shoulders and just saying, okay, this is going to right the system. When you have things that just don't make any sense, whether it's woke board members making bad decisions, or Elizabeth Warren, or people who are completely generations out of touch with reality, kind of running things and making decisions, it doesn't work. There's too many other people. There's too many people like SBF. There's too many innovators and other people who are just going to go and say, I don't think so. We're going to come in and change it. We're going to fix it, and we're going to make it better. And it's going to happen right now. We're going to reinvent this world. We're going to build back better, but not the way that the tyrants who invented that saying.
We're hitting all the great books. I just want to give a shout out to Sovereign Individual and Sapiens.
Nice.
Well, say it. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned one of my favorite fiction books, not because it was fake, it's brutally hard to read because the characters are so abhorrent. But of course, we're living it, which is Atlas Shrugged. And if you tell me that Elizabeth Warren and Gary Gensler aren't people that showed up, that you would say, oh, Ayn Rand wrote this character, 50 years ago. The reality is they look and feel and sound like Ayn Rand characters. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, let me complete the thought. The one thing I was going to say is it's because they say things that make no sense in terms of all it is getting control, but it's always couched in rhetoric of we're going to protect people, we're going to help people. It's like the insanity, I mean, literal insanity of saying oil prices or gas prices are too high and they want to enact policies to punish corporate greed. Well, if you punish corporate greed, if you tax something, you get less of it. When you get less of something, the price goes up if the demand stays the same. What rational human being thinks that this makes sense? Even the fact that they're talking about it decreases exploration, decreases production, stops an innovator from saying, okay, wait a minute, I have this new, better process to do this. I mean, it literally is problematic, and yet they don't care. And so, you know, in that book, of course, the world devolves and completely goes, and everyone smart goes into Galt's Gulch. We don't have that opportunity. I think the fourth turning is a more logical outcome, but still, there's a hell of a lot of chaos in between here and there. Sorry for the rant, but I couldn't help it.
It's okay. I was more of a Fountainhead fan, honestly, but
That's another good one.
I do like Atlas Strike. What I was talking to Mark Moss about this recently, actually, and he was sort of talking about the fourth turning, but also these economic cycles that we've seen over the years, and going back to like the 1500s. And I was like, isn't that just a massive indictment on humanity, though? It basically just means that we learn nothing over time. We eventually break everything with the same exact patterns and start again. What's the point?
Rhymes. History rhymes. Doesn't always repeat, but it rhymes. And humans, we all have it. I mean, let's face it. I'm not going to say I don't. We all have a tendency of overreacting and then trying to go. And the hope is that it eventually ends up in the middle. But you know, there's an overreaction sort of cycle to everything. I mean, 9/11 happened, and we ended up with the Patriot Act. And then people say, well, okay, wait a minute, you know, and you know, we have Snowden telling us what actually was happening. I mean, it's a fairly classic thing. It doesn't matter what the crisis. There's always an overreaction, and that's just human nature. And so the key is to try to rein it in as best you can.
But I mean, is this the first time that we actually have an asset that can, in theory, protect us from some of this nonsense? I mean, you know, we all talk about the way that the government behaved in 2008, TARP, all these things. Your average person, though, did not have Bitcoin to buy, right? And whether it plays out in that manner or not, there was no hard deflationary asset that people could, you know, put their savings into. You were really much more at the will of the government, and the government themselves had a much harder decision to make, I guess. Not saying that the United States government would have bought Bitcoin in 2008 or something like that. Obviously not the case. But now people sort of have no excuse if they're educated on the asset, right? You do have something that you can buy.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back in history, I mean, gold definitely served that purpose. And people forget about the 30s and what Roosevelt did. And what Roosevelt did to engender a 50% inflation in a tick. And that's the number, because when he confiscated gold, it was at 30. You know, he revalued it from 20. He confiscated all the gold, so the government owned it. Paid people $20 an ounce. Of course, quite a bit of it got sent overseas and whatever. But you know, whatever. He confiscated it at $20 an ounce. It got revalued into the 30s overnight. So essentially, what did he do? He stole money from people and then engineered a 50% one-time inflation in order to inflate away debt. I mean, you're shaking your head, Bruce, but that is what happened. And so today's politicians know that something like that would be, you couldn't get away with that in today's era because people would know it was happening. So they're trying to do it more, you know, it's this again, right? And it's the same thing, but it's not like this hasn't happened before. No, I don't think the government's going to confiscate Bitcoin. But if you think that the reason Gensler isn't pushing for an accredited investor rule to go to 10 million instead of being abolished entirely, if you think that that has nothing to do with this, then I got a bridge to sell you that I used to have a good view of from my apartment. I mean, if you look at all of the actions, I mean, I hate to sound like a conspiracy nut, but the reality is, you know, if you start from the presumption that Warren and Gensler are dumb, then you can say, oh, well, they just don't understand. I don't start from that assumption. I think they're both quite smart, and I think they know what they're doing. Although it is worth saying, because it was worth it last week, he did massively shoot himself in the foot last week on the regulatory side in that speech he gave. And that is what we're talking about.
We were probably all in Miami, but you must have heard it. What did he say?
So he gave a speech, and it's funny because, you know, we're Passover's coming up, and it was titled "The Four Questions of Crypto." Is kind of amusing, so I'm thinking, I'm thinking the Four Questions song in my head when I was reading it. But what he basically was talking about was, for the very first time, he admitted that for this to work, for him to be able to regulate crypto exchanges, they need to be able to trade crypto like Bitcoin and securities like whatever else you call securities on the same platform. Which, of course, the rules don't really work, and he kind of admitted that. But where he shot himself in the foot is he totally doesn't understand the simple fact, which is it's not the same platform that have to trade Bitcoin and name that token. It's the same trade. Because unlike what the SEC regulates, where everything is dollars, crypto trades pairwise. You can trade, let's just say for the sake of argument, token XYZ is a security, we decide, and it isn't now. And it trades on a single platform in dollars, yen, pounds. I mean, that's multi-currency and it doesn't exist right now. But it also trades against Bitcoin, USDC, and other stable coins, and Ethereum. Well, that's in the same trade to be regulated by the CFTC and the SEC. That is literally impossible. So he finally, in a speech, twisted himself to basically say, okay, the current rule set of the SEC and CFTC, which contradict, tick sizes aren't the same, fees aren't the same, FCM versus not FCM, all sorts of real technical reasons, you literally can't work. So he essentially shot himself in the foot. What's funny is, as far as I know, other than me, haven't heard anybody say that. But the truth is, there's a clarion call for proving why Hester Peirce and her idea of a safe harbor, working with the industry, with the regulators, is the only way forward. If you were Allison Heron Lee or Carolyn Crenshaw, forget Gensler, because I think he's a lost cause. If you're them against that safe harbor now, when you now have proof from your own SEC chairman's mouth that the only way forward is to harmonize the rules and work with the industry to do it, I'm stunned that this isn't getting more traction. But I think it's mostly because people are distracted because there's some stuff going on in the world that's rather distracting.
Yeah. Bruce, I want to ask you specifically. I mean, there's a lot of ways to affect change. Going into the wasp's nest is probably the most daring. Do you believe that, obviously you believe you can win, but do you believe that we can have enough people like you win that it can displace these systems from the inside? I mean, I think we all know that eventually we have this fourth turning, the people, sort of force change, but you're trying to do it literally by walking into Washington, which I think you're nuts, but I love it.
Yeah, it is nuts. I mean, and things that are nuts are, this is the time for them to work. A fourth turning is when anything can happen. I mean, really, anything can happen. If you look historically, when these kind of changes have happened, everything's on the table. Money can change, entire borders can change, countries can merge and change. Companies go out of business, entire new industries overnight become dominant. So the idea of a redneck Bitcoin libertarian from New Hampshire going into the Senate, I mean, that's barely even on the radar of weird. We're going to see a lot weirder things than this. So it's certainly possible that you could have, you could have a whole wave of this. There's about a dozen really interesting candidates running. There's great folks like Blake Masters and, with 5 or so people that are already there. I mean, you could see not just a red wave, but an entirely, kind of counterculture wave almost in just the Senate, for example. I mean, you could have a dozen people like me, real outsiders, very, very different ideas. And that does make a difference. I mean, then you're a voting block and you've got kind of Republicans and Democrats on each side. And you've got this block that's like the pro-freedom, pro-Bitcoin kind of contingent. That could be the most powerful block there is. So anything's possible, and anything can happen in the presidential election. Anything can happen with these other elections. Absolutely, anything is on the table, good or bad. We got to be very, very careful to hope that we end up with things on the right side.
I mean, you're running as a Republican, but you're not. I mean,
yeah, I'm really very libertarian. I'm a Ron Paul Republican. Very, very libertarian. I believe in liberty and freedom and peace and voluntary choice. And the Republican Party is other than the Libertarian Party, which has much, much lower chance of winning. If you want to win, and a race like this, it's very, very winnable.
That's the problem. You have to put yourself into this ridiculous 2-party basket if you even want a chance. I mean, someone called it the orange wave. So yeah, you talk about red or blue, let's call it orange.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah,
Maybe
yeah, you
that's
do have
the
to put
next
yourself
party.
in a box, but you know, that's part of the game. But you can reinvent it. You know, Ron Paul reinvented the system, and there's a lot of liberty Republicans, and I hope the Democrats do it too. By the way, you know, there's a lot of people in crypto, particularly Ethereum and other side that are more left leaning. But they also embrace some certainly cypherpunk principles and libertarian principles, and I would urge them to push for an orange wave on the left as well. You know, get rid of people like Elizabeth Warren who don't serve their interests, and there should be more liberty and peace. You know, even if you're really, really on the statist leftist side, you got to admit that it's kind of broken right now. I mean, come on, like you got to say like, you know what, I really love big government, but you got to admit that this is the time to swing the pendulum the other way, or or we're going to end up like China.
Yeah, I mean, look. The fact of the matter is, a lot of what you stand for, Bruce, used to be somewhat bipartisan. I'm old enough to remember Rockefeller Republicans and people like Bill Bradley running as a Democrat, and both
Right.
of them were, the whole notion of compassionate conservatism, whatever you call it. Look, the reality is, most people in Bitcoin are very, very liberal on what are social issues. Whether it's LGBTQ rights or discrimination, we're all like, people are people. Everyone deserves respect. It's an inclusive, open community. That's what we want. So, whatever you put an R or a D next to your name on your voter registration card, the fact is most people here believe in that. There is a line. Some people believe we should have more social help to people. Some people should be dependent on different things, incentives, etc. But at the end of the day, you could accomplish all of that without the government controlling every aspect of our lives. And I think that, you see people like, I disagree with them on many, many issues, but all you have to do is look at Ron Wyden in Oregon. Now, Ron Wyden is a staunch proponent of freedom. He is also a staunch proponent of big government in the sense of helping people. And he and I will draw the line of where that goes in different places, but I respect him, right? But that's, I think, what you're talking about. The fact is politics used to be about where you drew that line, what sort of policies, and it all of a sudden became, this kind of tribal thing where, I mean, the fact that we have, and I'm going to pick on him because I've met him, know him, and actually like him, Josh Gottheimer. Josh Gottheimer voted party line on all of the stuff which led to this inflation. There is no way he agreed with it. No way. I know that because I've talked to him, at various events before the pandemic. I understand he's a centrist, Democrat, and he's in a.
Is that because he wants to keep his job? I mean, that's.
Sure,
I know Bruce wouldn't. Wouldn't do that.
Republican in a very, very conservative district. But the point is you see people who voted for laws that they don't agree with because it was part of their party. And as long as we're playing, when politics become football with everybody, acting in the same way, things like this happen. And I think that's what Bruce is sort of talking about. It's like that voting idea of a voting block, and that's happened before. It just, now it may be more important.
Maybe the fourth turning this go round breaks the two-party system. I believe that elections, like markets, are clearing mechanisms, right? And what we have here is we've got two kind of bad products right now derived from two kind of extreme political bases. And I think, hopefully the optimistic view is that we start to erode that two-party system and, get better products to vote for and clear the market and get, really good policy that we all love. RoundlyX is refining its roadmap. We want to round up into third-party candidates, candidates like Bruce, with Bitcoin donations. So, more to come on that. But we would like to be a part of the infrastructure piece of free speech, enabling easier donation to truly policy-seeking candidates.
Well, this is you can't give a donation in a first world country anymore without the government blocking it, right? Not in America, but we've seen in Canada. It's crazy, right? So you talk about donations in politics. Now we live in a world where those can be effectively blocked, right? We saw it in Canada.
Yeah, tragic.
Scary.
And there's a million rules. I've learned a lot about the rules. It's very, very difficult. I wish I could just put a QR code up and have people send it, but there's all kinds of limits, and you need AML KYC on them just to have them donate, and that's all, of course, stacked to the to the incumbents in the system. You know, the people that are in power, they have PACs and leadership PACs and systems, and they have armies of lawyers to help them, you know, weave through the regulations and find the loopholes so that they can basically do whatever they want. But it is very difficult, and it's you know, back to this idea of the government controlling things, which is why CBDCs are so dangerous. You know, the idea that they can just say who can get money where. It's very, very close to being able to say, oh yeah, this candidate is an extremist, or this candidate is racist, or, you know, whatever buzzword they want to use, and then they can't get funding, or causes can't even get funding.
I mean, think about CBDCs and the concept of what we've seen over the last few years. I mean, for, you know, Trudeau and what he did, but even in the United States, and yes, it was done by private companies, but a coordinated suppression of the New York Post before the election. So now think about that. If the party in charge has the power to literally stop transactions, to to essentially sanction an individual or sanction a company at will with no due process, that's what the CBDC would allow.
Yep.
Which is why I actually think that there's no way it would happen here, because I think there's no way it passes a Fourth Amendment test, like literally ever, because the government would have that power. Now they'll say, oh, well, we'll disable that feature. Yeah, you know, but the fact of the matter is that it's kind of a very big deal. And make no mistake, that's exactly why China wants it. They've been clear about it. They've actually said that's why they want it. They want to be able to control, right? They, you know, that's what they want. And that's fine, but that's not what we are here.
Yeah. I have a question for Bruce. Again, sorry to keep picking on you, but you're out on the campaign trail. And I think that we've seen a shift, and I could be wrong, this might be anecdotal, to people becoming one-issue voters, right? And people in our community perhaps really becoming one-issue voters about crypto, which is something I don't think we saw a few years ago. Is that a accurate assessment? Are you having those conversations, or do you think it's more general? It just feels like people would say, hey, if you're pro Bitcoin, I'll vote for you. If you're against it, I won't. Not that many. I'm not saying everyone, but you know, a small percentage of the population were passionate about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of polarizing issues, a lot of issues people care a lot about. There's a lot of single issue voters about, you know, freedom and lockdowns and things like that too. People who never voted before, but they're so upset about the lockdown. If you take somebody's business away, you know, they care a lot about that. They're gonna vote that, you know, with that. And Bitcoiners are very, very passionate. So there's definitely supporters that I have who you know, and there's people who just don't even agree with my politics. They say, hey, I'm big lefty, I'm big Democrat.
That's what I'm saying.
You know, I'm an Elizabeth Warren fan, but I feel betrayed by Elizabeth Warren. And you're a Bitcoin guy, and especially like a lot of the real true believers, we really believe that this goofy you know, internet nerd money that we all helped create and helped build, it really can make the world a better place. I mean, fix the money, fix the world. There's a lot of problems that fiat has, you know, not the least of which, you know, 300 million people in the last century killed by their own governments. You know, it's a pretty bad thing, fiat. And Bitcoin does fix this. It really does. And I know that there's nothing that I can do as a I hate to say the politician, it still feels like I need to take a shower, but I guess I am one if I'm running for office. But, you know, as a politician, there's nothing that, as an elected official, there's nothing that I can do that's going to be as significant as Bitcoin. I believe that Bitcoin's much, much more significant in its ability to create human freedom and push the world along. There's a lot of people who share that value. So they can look at me and say, and other candidates who are pro-Bitcoin. You know, down in Miami, we had some Democrats and Republicans as well in a pro Bitcoin kind of rally to talk to supporters. And yeah, there's absolutely a lot of people who say that, you know, this is the way. We fix the money, we can fix the world. If we can move to Bitcoin and a Bitcoin standard, it makes the whole world better, and almost every problem we've discussed goes away. So it makes sense to be a single issue voter, because that single issue is the one thing that can move the needle in the world and make the world a better place, probably better than anything else, and certainly better than any individual or any politician can.
I would love to see. I would love to suggest one spin on that. I mean, I agree with where sound money could take us and where Bitcoin standard could go, but incrementally allowing people to make economic choices at all levels of the economic spectrum, I think, is incredibly important. What
accredited investor laws.
The Celsius announcement is one of the saddest commentaries on America, on Gensler and Warren. It really is, because I'm sure Alex felt like he had to. I'm sure he didn't want to, but people need to understand what this means. And for those who don't know, they basically said we can only offer our high interest rate products to accredited investors. Now, what was he trying to do? What is Celsius's business model? Their business model effectively is to take the financing going on in the crypto trading world and transmit the lion's share of that economic demand back to the benefit of the holders of the assets. So if you own Bitcoin and you pledge it and you loan it out, you get the value, the economic value that people are demanding for it. If you look at the traditional financial world, stocks, investors, if you own IBM in your brokerage account, you probably get nothing from Fidelity or Schwab or whoever loaning it out. They're making that money, but who's really making the money are the big prime brokers who then take that and make prime brokerage out of it. It sounds technical, but what it really is about empowering people. People always talk about Web3 as, well, you are the data and you should have control over it. This is something much more basic. You own an asset, should you get the value of it? Allowed to work this way, allowed to be free, the economy will return the value to the investors because companies will compete to provide better interest rates to investors to get those assets. That's pure competition. That does not exist in the rest of the legacy financial system. That is one of the major hallmarks of why DeFi will ultimately be a big force. It's one of the major hallmarks of why Bitcoin in a free economy will get there. Forget the protocols, just at its basic level. Should investors be able to get the benefit of their investments? And Gary Gensler says no.
Actually, he says yes if you're rich.
He says yes, if my friends and I can.
For me, but not for thee.
Yeah.
That is literally what they're saying. I can't. That is so easy to explain. It seems to me that should be a major issue, and it should be an acid test issue. But because it really is pure economic freedom. It's like, if I'm not worth $10 million, I shouldn't be able to get the benefit of what I own. I mean, that is literally what he's saying.
Or make my own financial decisions. It's literally it's not only saying you shouldn't get the benefit, which I agree with you is the most basic level. It's saying we have deemed you too stupid to make a sound financial decision for yourself. This product's too dangerous for you because you're not rich enough to understand.
Go have fun in Vegas. You're allowed to go to the gambling places in Vegas, but you're not allowed to buy the hedge funds that the rich people buy.
Oh, it's worse than that because when you make it on assets, what you're essentially doing is skewing against the young. Now, you tell me, who's at more risk? A person with $10 million putting $9.9 million in a Ponzi scheme, or a kid who's fresh out of school who has $20,000 and he puts it in a Ponzi scheme, he loses it. The kid recovers immediately. The person who's older is destitute and jumping off buildings. And, to say that a rich it's on its face a priori wrong, but it's the foundation for what they say is a major part of governance. It's where he gets his power. So to me, that's a very big deal. I mean, I've offered to debate him on any stage, any place, at any time, and I'm not alone. There are many people who would, but you might have noticed that
I'll wrestle him.
Never once appeared in a public forum with someone who disagrees with him in an open forum. Never once. Now, you can't say that of another SEC chairman. There is a reason. It's because he continually pushes and doesn't want blowback. So it's a serious issue. But I mean, it's not just him. It's the entire political system that's trying to prop that up, and that wing of the party. And so it's a very big deal. But if you want to get people jazzed, tell them this is the guy, or these are the people. Your opponents are the people who support you can't make decisions. You can't get good interest. Only the rich people can.
Okay? Yeah, at the end of the day, it's Gary Gensler telling you to have fun staying poor.
Exactly.
It sadly is. And unfortunately, we have to wrap it up because I know you guys have to go. We're at an hour and then it'll get awkward when you have to leave and stuff. So guys, thank you so much for having this conversation. Obviously, Sam was here earlier. Bruce, Bruce, where can everybody find you and help support?
BruceFenton.com is my website, and I've tried to put all my positions on there. It's a little different than a lot of campaign websites. It's like, the same website I've been running for 20 years. It has my personal blog, and I want people to get to know me, and especially if you know anybody in New Hampshire, share it with them, and let the New Hampshire voters know who I am and what I stand for.
Awesome. Dave, where can people catch up with you?
Well, at Dave Weisberger 1 on Twitter, or at CoinRoutes. We're starting to get a little bit more active, or on LinkedIn, or CoinRoutes.com.
Awesome. Andrew, guys, you all know I think I was one of RoundlyX's first 100 customers.
Oh, cool.
He was, yeah, early days. Yeah, I think we were doing like $100 worth of spare change every day back then, which was, super exciting for us.
I was like $43 of it, killing it.
Yep. Yeah.
So where can everybody keep up and check out what you guys are doing?
Twitter at RoundlyX or roundlyx.com or in either app store.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much. We are going to now exit. Guys, I'll be back tomorrow morning, 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that's it. Thank you to our guests. Follow them. Check them out. Peace, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Let's go.